Hi, and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week, we are talking all about how to use inner child work to help you let go of childhood trauma. Now, when we want to move on from the past and let go of childhood trauma, injustice, and unfairness, that part of our mind that we call the inner child keeps us stuck. Now, our inner child just does not understand what happened to us in childhood, oftentimes, or it won't accept what happened. It desperately wants to hold on to its story of injustice and unfairness. So now, as the mature adult, how do we help our inner child? Often we can actually agree with the inner child's narrative, so it makes it impossible to move on. So what's going on here? Why does the inner child get so stuck? And what can we do to reparent our inner child to help it finally let go and move on? Well, in this week's teaching, we answer your questions. Okay, David, so when we are doing inner child work, I know you always say the first step is to understand where the inner child's coming from, what the inner child's logic is or faulty logic is, in order to then be able to work with the inner child authentically. So I guess the first question is, why is it that the inner child gets so stuck on childhood, injustice, unfairness, that sort of thing?
I think it's a great question, Alex. And I think it's one of the real sticking points that when we're trying to understand, when we do the golden thread, the reverse engineering, and we start from the emotions and we go back, why, asking the questions. And then we go back right to that part of the mind that we're labeling the inner child. This question about injustice, unfairness, is the one that I notice my clients have the most difficulty with. This is based on the Taoist teaching, is you cannot change what you don't understand. So what I try and do with my clients, the first thing is, let's try and understand what's going on with that part of your mind that we're labeling the inner child. You may prefer the ego label or the emotional mind label, but I think you'll find in this video why the label of the inner child gives you a better understanding of how that part of your mind is acting and thinking. Now, you may be a big mature person and being able to deal with things really well, but on an emotional level, which is most things, it's going through this filter of the inner child. So hopefully this will be the kind of 101 base understanding of where the inner child gets misunderstood about injustice and unfairness.
And just for people who are new listeners, the golden thread or the golden thread process that you refer to is the technique that we use, your therapy technique, to help with that understanding. So we're starting with the emotions, as you say, and then we're reverse engineering and questioning the self-talk, the thoughts, and then finally drilling down to the core beliefs that the inner child is operating by, and in essence, then we are operating by. So in the case of...
Can I just say though, Alex, because the difficulty here, you're absolutely right. It is like reverse engineering or following electrical plan. You're following the wire back. Now, a lot of people say, oh, yes, but I don't think that. But when it's in your core belief, as you say, I call it the fountainhead. It's not that you wake up every morning and think something, but it's so deeply into your program of thinking. It's almost like it is a very subconscious thing that you're doing, but it is your mind and you can change it.
So, I mean, I agree with you insofar as that stuff to do with childhood situations or childhood people where that part of our mind believes we were slighted, we were hurt, we were attacked, we were traumatized, we suffered injustice or unfairness. I agree. It's not something that we wake up every morning thinking about, but it has a very pervasive influence. It stops us basically, if we hold on to faulty beliefs, if the inner child holds on to faulty beliefs about what happened to it in childhood, then we cannot live our adult life in flow, in positive, warm, fuzzy, green light feelings. We can't reach our potential because there's a part of our psyche that is stuck in the past and going round and round and round in circles on thinking about past stuff that it can reach no positive resolution on.
And so if this is you and you think it may be you, here's a couple of the tips. If you hear yourself saying, oh, it's my nature, oh, it's the way I am, oh, it's ingrained, oh, I can't change it, then this may be you. So listen on, because this is very important, particularly if you see yourself being what we call CCJ, criticizing, comparing, or being judgmental about others or about yourself.
So when we are a child and something happens to us which is we consider to be bad or wrong, and it gives us a rush of uncomfortable or painful red light emotions, surely though that's perfectly natural for that us as a child to experience that or to think that way because we don't know any better.
Exactly, and that's why the analogy or the metaphor of the inner child really works. Because when you're a child, and I always say between 6 and 9 seems to be a very formative year, that your emotions are fully developed, but your cognitive reasoning, the way you view the world, is not fully developed. And we get brought up in a very black-white, yes, no, good, bad environment. I call it the carrot and the stick. If you're a good girl or a good boy, mummy and daddy are pleased with you. If you don't do what they like, they are displeased with you. See, there's no grey areas here. And here you see the first foundation of what we call the emotional pendulum. Yes, no, good, bad, right, wrong. And it's these extremes, fair, unfair, just, unjust. And so it swings. And so the formation of your emotional mind, it's built up from these extremes. We're trying to offer you and explain to you that there is a midway here that we call wu-wei, this middle ground, this kind of more neutral ground, this more thoughtful ground. But your mind has normally been brought up in not that mind, is that black-white, this is your time, you must do this is the exams, you've got to do that, and it's this extreme that the child will think is natural.
And I guess as a child, it's easier for us to grasp and understand extremes, good, bad, right, wrong, fair and unfair. And so because we, as a child, it's thinking in a more nuanced way where we may be thinking about things from other people's perspective or looking at the bigger picture. It's not natural, I guess, for a young child to think like that.
And you'll see this very strongly. If you see how children are, they can be extremely cruel. You see how children bully and pick on people who are taller, shorter, ginger hair, ears sticking out. Children have very great difficulty in understanding that because they see things in these extreme forms, because that's what they've been brought up with, to see these comparing and criticizing and being judgmental.
But if we then as an adult reflect back on what happened to us, say for example, we encountered a negative person or a negative situation when we were younger. So either we were bullied at school or we encountered a traumatic event when we were younger, such as our parents getting divorced, one of our parents leaving the family home and we don't see them again. We, as a child, can experience a lot of red light feelings around those incidences, and we can then develop a belief around injustice or unfairness, or that was wrong that happened, it shouldn't have happened. And now as an adult, if we look back, it can be difficult for a lot of people to say, well, it still wasn't okay. It's very, even as an adult, to look back about what happened, it's difficult to accept what happened was okay and then move on.
You'd be amazed with the amount of my clients that when we go back and we do the golden thread and we retrace and we re-engineer and we look at it, you'll be amazed how many of my clients and their inner child take responsibility for their parents. You mentioned something like divorce or breakup or arguments or mother or father being unhappy, unsatisfied, and you'll see the child has to try and rationalize that. And this is one of the difficulties, because when you are a child, of course, you're codependent. You are dependent on your parents for your food, shelter, clothing, education. You're trying to please them. It's very natural. So if you see your mother and father arguing or your mother having problems, it's very easy saying, well, it must be me. And that's what I call the vow. You know, when we do the inner child work and we get to the lies, I'm not good enough, I can't cope, I'm unlovable or I'm unworthy. Under that lies this vow, there must be something wrong with me. And just as you explained, when a child encounters something in their childhood that they haven't had the emotional education to deal with, it is absolutely understandable that they would then blame themselves and say, of course, it must be me. There's something wrong with me. But that sets that core fountainhead misunderstanding that sends you down the wrong track.
And do you think that, so I can see in the example of, say, a love parent leaving the family home, the child, as a young child, we don't understand that, so we can blame ourselves somehow, even though the reality is we have nothing to do with it. It's about our parents' relationship breaking down. But do you think we also secretly can blame ourselves for the times when we're bullied or if we're abused in any sort of way? Do you think that although the surface level issue that the inner child may have is that wasn't fair, that shouldn't have happened, they shouldn't have done this, i.e. almost like blaming the situation or blaming the person, but do you think deep down secretly we're blaming ourselves and that's why we can't let go?
I can't be precise on every client and everyone that's listening to me here, but what you've just said, surprisingly, I see time and time again. When you've been in a situation, a bullying or abuse, all different types of abuse, the high level is to blame them. But on a much deeper, a more profound level, the level that we get to when we're working with a client, they nearly always blame themselves. There must be something wrong with me. I must have attracted it. They are right, my ears stick out. They are right, I'm a bit fat. They are right, I've got ginger hair. And because what the child is still doing is being codependent, and they're looking outside of themselves for authority, approval, love, attention, instead of looking internally, because that's what they've been taught. That's how they've been brought up. You look outside of yourself for validation. But if you think of the word validation, what it's saying is you look outside of yourself to gain value. And that's where it's going wrong. So you're right, on a high level, they'll say, it's not fair, it shouldn't happen, blah, 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 this is wrong, the schools, I hate the school, I hate the teacher, whatever. But on a much deeper, more profound, long-lasting level, they will blame themselves.
So I can see that as a child, it was natural to have that codependency in place because, of course, we're a young child. We are codependent on adults to look after us and to give us feedback so we can learn and grow in a certain direction. Yes. We have that reliance. Are you saying that we now are still carrying the same codependency as an adult, and therefore that is one of the reasons why we can't let go of childhood injustice and unfairness.
That's exactly what I'm saying. The part of your mind that I'm calling the inner child is still looking externally outside of yourself to get that what it believes it needs. Let me repeat that. It believes it needs it. It needs external validation, approval, attention. It needs that. It's like a piece of your soul, if you like, piece deep inside of you is missing, and you're constantly looking for others to fill it. Is this you? Here comes an example. Do you constantly worry about what other people think about you? Are you on a mission to people please? Are you concerned when people are talking behind your back? Do you constantly look at social media and thinking and trying to compare yourself? Here is the manifestation of this scared, frightened little child constantly looking outside to get what they think they need, to be told, you're a good girl. Aren't you doing well? Oh, I'm so proud of you. But in a funny way, it's like a drug. It's never enough, is it? It's never enough. Somebody tells you, I love you so much. You go, do they really mean that? So you never get what you need. And one of my clients said to me, it's like being addicted. And it's true. You're always searching. We've done several videos on this. Always searching. Like, I think about it, that picture of the donkey and the carrot that's just dangling in front of the donkey. And the donkey is always trying to grab the carrot. And this is the problem, because you've been brought up to believe that you need this worth, this value, this approval from external sources.
And I guess if you're externally orientated for your own value and worth, as you describe, then if we are bullied rather than people constantly praising us, or if a bad situation happens, that is totally rocks our world, and we're dependent on the external world for being a nice, rosy, happy place, that then completely destabilizes us. It obviously destabilizes us as a child, but if we're still operating on the same belief system, then we are still super destabilized.
Absolutely. In our model, I call it the utopian or the Disney world or the fairy story, because that's what we're told as a child. Everything is the way that you want it to be. We will be a lovely little happy family, like in the films, like on TV, like in the books, like a Disney story, a utopian, where everyone's happy. No one criticizes, no one compares, no one's judgmental. You get what you want because you're a good girl, you're a good boy. If you do well, you will get the rewards. But that is not the reality. That is like a fairy story. Because then when you say, well, I did really well and I didn't get the rewards. Because let me tell you, if you hear a child, if you hear your physical child saying to you, Daddy, Mummy, it's not fair. It's not fair. It always amazes me how young, with my children, they had this idea of fairness. Where did they get it from? And then it dawned on me. It came to me. When a child says, it's not fair, what they're actually saying, it's not the way I want it to be. And that's what your inner child is saying. Reality, life, people is not the way I want it to be. I want to be walking this fairy story, this utopian, where everything I do is great, is perfect. Everybody goes, wow, look at you. You got that right first time. And by the way, aren't you so beautiful? We all love you. You're on a pedestal. You're top of the heap. This is the little story, if you want, the little secret that's going on in the inner child's mind.
And a lot of us think like that, but in fact, we are kind of too embarrassed to admit it.
Exactly.
That the adult part of us knows that we can't always get our own way. Bad things do happen. There are imbalanced people out there in the world that we will encounter. So logically, we know that because we've got some life experience under our belt. But that inner child part of our mind is still holding on to the fairy tale. And when we hold on to the fairy tale that everyone should love us, nothing should go wrong, nothing should have ever gone wrong in my childhood, everyone should have loved me in my childhood and been completely demonstrative of that. When our inner child holds on to that, of course, we can't flow with life. We can't flow with reality.
Because we have an inner conflict.
Yeah.
And this is why the inner child metaphor really is very strong. Instead of being one, which we're trying to encourage you and inspire you to be, working together, walking together, inside of you, inside your head, inside your body, you have this inner conflict, this tension, where the inner child has this vision, as Alex says, of this fairy story world where everybody is happy and everything goes the way that you want it to go. And then you have reality, and you have to live in reality. And you do well. You've done well. You've got a job, you've got a career, you've got a family, you're doing your best. You're working really hard. In fact, I would say, and I say in many videos, you're overworking, you're working, you're straining, because it's almost like you're pulling an anchor along with every moment. Instead of walking and flowing, you're struggling. You're having to struggle through every moment. And this depletes your chi energy. This wears you down. This confuses your mind. And so when you see a situation, the inner child steps in really quickly and almost takes over.
And I know that, clients and supporters have written to us and said, I kind of grasp the understanding of what's going on here. I want to be able to help my inner child with this situation. I know that this needs to be done through reparenting. But when my inner child turns to me rather than other people for validation, for reassurance, for guidance, as you say, don't look externally, look internally. I haven't got the answers because I kind of believe that it wasn't fair what happened to me in childhood. There was a great injustice. How do I explain to my child what's going on? And then it's almost like we're both, the adult me and my inner child, we're both stuck in this constant cycle. And as you say, dragging this anchor along where we're going through our adult life, but there's this secret dark anchor we're dragging along behind us because we just can't let go of the past.
And that's why we did a specific video on this, or the reparenting video. And the first step on that reparenting video is the adult part of you have to become a reliable and good, fair parent. So when the inner child speaks to you and says it's not fair, you have a answer to give to that child. And as Alex said, this is where it gets confused, because the inner child says, I can't cope. You kind of agree with them. When the inner child says, I'm not good enough, that's why it's going wrong. I'm not good enough. You kind of say, well, you're right. When the inner child says something even more powerful, I'm unlovable and I'm unworthy, you kind of agree with them. And in that moment, you as the adult are not in control of your life. You are being led by your inner child. You're being led by a 6-7-year-old. As I often say, it's like driving a car and giving the steering wheel to a 7-year-old, and they're doing their best to drive it. This is why I say I never, never, never chastise the inner child, because the inner child is confused, frightened, and it doesn't know what to do. And it's constantly looking externally for experts, doctors, whoever, people that it sees that it's going to give it what it needs again, you see? And of course, it never happens. And then it convinces you that you've got to look outside of yourself. And this is where it goes wrong, because you are not in control of your life. The inner child is guiding you.
And I get that thing, what you're talking about there, looking to the specialist, the expert, the guru,
Authority.
the right book
Yeah.
to give us some sort of temporary reassurance that we are okay, we are good enough, we are lovable. But none of this corrects the deep-seated belief that unless everything's going right in the world, unless everyone loves me, then I'm not okay, I'm not enough. And so if the inner child turns to us for that reassurance, that inner knowing, and we haven't convinced ourselves, the adult self, of that, where do we go as the adult for the wisdom, the answers to then pass on to the inner child?
Well, you kind of answered your own question there, because I think this, in the model that you're looking at with us, is the big difference to our contemporaries. So I am saying that you already know all of the correct, balanced, authentic, true answers inside of you. And this is what I would call Shen spirituality. I want to make clear, when I say spirituality, I am not talking something supernatural, external. You see, I do not want you to go external. I am saying that everything you need to know, your inner wisdom, your inspiration, your inner knowing, your authenticity, you already have it. And I've been doing this job now for over 30 years. A really long time, well, even longer than 30 years. And you know what my clients say to me? I always knew that. I always knew that. And this is that you always know that inner truth, that inner knowing, that gut feeling. How many times have you said, I knew it was wrong. I knew I shouldn't have taken that job. I knew I shouldn't have gone out with them. I knew I shouldn't have done that. I knew I was going against myself. How many times have you said that? And really, this is the difference with the Wu Wei wisdom model. It's getting reacquainted, reconnected with what I call Shen, that Shen spirituality, because I believe that is the authority, not external authority, but that inner knowing. So the first job is you as the adult. And that's hopefully why you're listening to us, that you get reconnected to that creativity, that sensitivity. My clients often offer me sensitivity as a weakness. And I go, you're joking. Your sensitivity is your greatest asset. To be able to do things with sensitivity. I wish you dealt with your inner child with sensitivity, because a lot of my clients will deal with their child much harsher than your own parents did. And above all, one thing that really is so deep inside of that gut feeling is your determination. A strong determination. And how do I know you've got a strong determination? It's because your inner child, he's one stubborn person. She and he will dig their heels in. And remember, the inner child is just you, and determination out of balance is stubbornness. Determination the other way is giving in, giving up, throwing in the towel, hiding under the bedclothes. This is the energy in the pendulum of determination. So that's why I know for a fact your greatest quality in your Shen spirituality is determination.
So just to be clear, David, what you're saying is that as a human being, the energy of our mind has the qualities of the inner child.
Yes.
but it also has the ability to access the qualities of our spiritual Shen energy, which is like the wise inner sage. So we have equal parts, if you like, yin and yang. But that, for a lot of people, they can spend their whole life flipping between the inner child being at its extremes, having a temper tantrum, being really fearful, and then just still being in the child, but just having it a little bit calmer, a little bit quieter. But they never reconnect, as you say, to use your word, with that other vital part of themselves, that Shen. And so we don't have the appropriate balance between the yin and yang. And that, if I've understood you right, what you're saying is, in order for us as, I guess, the adult authentic self, which is would you say is the correct balance between the yin and yang, the inner child voice and the Shen voice, in order to reach that as the authentic adult, we need to spend more time reconnecting, accessing that Shen spirituality within us.
Yes. When I'm working with the clients, I often say to kind of open up this part of your mind and your spiritual energy. Why don't you think about it this way? Using the metaphor of the inner child, think about your inner child as your spiritual child, and you are the spiritual parent. So when the child comes in, it's not fair, this is not, I'm gonna fail, it's all gonna go wrong, they're gonna criticize me, they're gonna, and she comes to you with this overwhelm, a lot of my clients call it. This is your child having a squealing piglet, absolutely ranting and raving. And people laugh when I say, stop it. And they say, well, it's not that easy, but you've got to stop that absolute explosion of energy, because if you don't, you get washed along with it and the child drops in control. Now, I call it compassionate self-discipline, because I know a lot of my clients have been overly disciplined as a child. So I'm not saying you're harsh, but I am saying you're disciplined, and it's in a compassionate way. And I think the teaching of stop it is a really powerful way, because the child kind of, she's not expecting this. She's expecting you to go, oh, yeah, I agree with you. Oh, it's because you had a bad mother, a bad child. Oh, come here, dog. No, stop it. Stop it now. And let's now look at this. This is you acting as the spiritual parent. Let's look at this situation and let's examine this situation to find the way through it.
So I can see how that's very important to, I guess, stop the spiral of things getting completely out of control in terms of the inner child narrative. So when we've kind of said to the child, okay, I'm going to listen to you, I'm not going to ignore you, but we just need to kind of sit quietly now and talk this through. Basically, stop it. Let's do something here. Let's talk about this. Not just stop it and forget about it. Yes. We're stopping it, but we are now going to address this. We're now going to talk about this. I want to be here as the mature, authentic adult to answer your questions, to explain to you about what happened. So, and in this process, you're saying, we need to access our Shen wisdom, our Shen voice, in order to be able to have this authentic conversation with the inner child, rather than being an echo chamber of what the inner child's already telling us and agreeing with it.
I love that, Alex. That's a great saying you've just said. Do not be the echo chamber. Yeah. You've got to offer it something new.
Yeah, different, to consider in a calm way. Yes. But not as a fait accompli, no. Because we want the child to, we don't want to say, right, this is it, this is how it is, get on with it and stop moaning. The child needs to buy into it. It needs to trust you.
Emotional education.
Okay. So if the child comes to us and says, it was not fair that I was bullied when I was younger, those children were naughty to me and I felt really bad, and I felt really bad for years, and nobody listened to me, and it wasn't fair, and that is really affecting my schooling and my education and the rest of my life, and nobody did anything about it. What would our Shen wisdom, what would our Shen voice say in response to that, rather than just agreeing with the inner child?
Well, first of all, I would agree with the inner child, because the Shen voice is always from truth, honesty, and integrity. So you never lie to your inner child. So what you do, if on the example, the role play that you've just done, and that was the truth, I would say, you are correct. You were bullied. That is the truth. And I would just acknowledge, almost repeat what it's saying to you, because what happens to a lot of my clients, their inner child has never been acknowledged. So what you're doing is acknowledging, but not as an equal to the child, as the spiritual adult, as the authority. You say, you're right. I call them son or little one or sweetheart. You're right, sweetheart. You were bullied. Now, what do we want to do with that fact? Because the way that I would look at it, that shows me just how awesome you are. That shows me that through that adversity, with no help at all from your parents, from the teachers, from authority, you still came through it. And you came through it and hold your absolute inner strength. Because the evidence is you're here talking to me. Now, the difference is, moving forward, as obviously we do more, I know we haven't got time to go deeply into it, but I would love to talk to that inner child, because I think she's pretty awesome. And I would be saying to her, after we've had that conversation, which would last 10 minutes, understanding what she experienced, how she dealt with it, what her view of the situation was, basically having that spiritual conversation, then I would move on and I would say, but from this moment on, it's different.
Yeah.
Because now you have got somebody that will listen to you. You have got somebody that will hold your hand and walk in harmony with you. So if anything like that ever happened in the future, you will never be on your own.
And I can see that, having that reassurance that we may have never given ourselves before, because we've always looked externally for the reassurance. I can see how that can be quite a paradigm shift for the inner child, because it may have never been given that from us before.
Absolutely.
But I can also see that the inner child has a kind of few comebacks on that argument.
Big comeback.
So the inner child will say, okay, you're saying I'm wonderful now, and aren't I strong and good for getting through it, and now I'm a stronger person. But what about the fact that they got away with it? Or actually, I believe I got bullied because I'm not good enough and I'm unlovable, and I'm still holding on to that. So I guess there'll always be a few layers of issues associated with an event from childhood.
There's an even deeper layer, Alex. You're right. There'll be layers there, and we've done many videos on how to deal with those layers. And the layers are real, and they should be addressed calmly, correctly. But there's a really deeper level. The inner child at the beginning, when you change that part of your mind, will frankly not trust you. It will think you're a flake. It will think you're just giving in, because up until this point, it's wrapped you round its little finger. And that's why we say on the reparenting videos and the teachings, you have to get yourself in that position that you demonstrate that you are no longer a flake, that can be blown over by the inner child. That's why the teaching of stop it is so important, because the inner child is actually looking for authority, is looking for someone that will stand up to it and for it. Because once the inner child is more powerful to you, once the inner child is more powerful than you, you are no use to the inner child.
Yeah.
So there will be a clash, but it will be a different clash. It will be a clash of who is in control here. Now, once you give in to your inner child, once you don't say stop it and it's got the upper hand, now you have no authority. It's not going to listen to you, and immediately starts looking for someone else.
Yeah. And I guess that this thing about it's okay in theory to just sit the child down, say stop it, sit the child down, answer its first question from a place of authenticity. But inevitably, the inner child will bring up another issue.
Absolutely.
It's like, I think you've described in the past, this game of whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
You explain one thing to it, it brings up another issue. You explain that to it, it brings up another issue. And I guess the strategy there for the inner child is it wants you to give up.
It does.
So
It's testing you.
Yeah, you have to be in this process for the long haul. You have to be, when you're doing the inner child reparenting, you have to expect that it's going to be peeling layers of an onion. Because when you help the inner child to resolve and release one level or one layer of the injustice and unfairness, that will then perhaps reveal another issue, which is more deep-seated, which is maybe this dark secret that it blames itself for what happened. So you're constantly, through the reparenting process, peeling back these layers and working with the inner child all the way through, being patient, being consistent.
But it's very interesting what you kind of alluded to there, because I get this as off a lot of my clients. They say, oh, God, how long is this going to take? I haven't got the energy for this. But I say, you haven't got the energy not to do it, because you're going to do this one way or another. You are on this life journey. This is your flow. All we're talking about, how do you flow? Do you flow in balance or out of balance? You can't suddenly say, well, how long is this going to take? This is the number one question I get. How long is this going to take? And I drive people mad, because I say, it takes that long. It takes that long until you take responsibility, until you are accountable for yourself. That's how long it takes, until you stop looking for other people, the magic fairy godmother of emotions, to come in and sort out all your life and people. That's what takes the time. And it's how you walk this path. I always say, the Taoist teaching, walk in fresh snow. You are unique. No one has walked your path. The example that Alex gave about bullying, I am very sorry that you had to go through bullying, but I can almost assure you that if it wasn't bullying, it would have been something else and something else. No one lives this perfect life. This is a teaching I often give to my clients as inner child. There is no such thing as a perfect life. And they often say, oh, yes, but my friend, look how happy they are. And I say, no, look behind the mask. Look a few years on. And they always say, yes, you're right, yeah. They split up later, or they went into had problems. There is no such thing as this perfect, idyllic, utopian life. And so it's not that you can jump out and suddenly the roses grow around the door and bunny rabbits jump around the field and you whistle a happy tune, because that is not reality. We have to get you equipped for living in reality. So
that teaching the inner child about reality, that it is unpredictable, it is outside of our control. Absolutely. What other people do is outside of our control. What situations happen more often than not are outside our control.
But how we respond to them.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that teaching That life lesson, along with the life lesson that the inner child needs to come to us as the adult, needs to be able to trust us as the adult for guidance, for reassurance, for wisdom. That is the path to letting go of long-held injustices, unfairnesses.
I think the life lesson, if this is you and you've stuck with us, this has been a long video, so thank you for sticking with us because it's a complicated teaching. I think the life lesson here is consider yourself as the spiritual parent. So when you hear that part of your mind, whatever you call it, the self-critic, the inner critic, don't look at it as something that's evil or bad and you've got to shut off or avoid. Welcome it into your mind and act from that spiritual inner knowing, inner determination, inner sensitivity, inner creativeness, because what we're trying to encourage you and your inner child not to be separate at war, fighting each other, but to come into a oneness that you walk and your flow and you reach and flourish and reach your true potential.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Well, I hope you enjoyed this teaching. We have done several other teachings on the stuck inner child, letting go of unfairness and injustice, and how to get the adult you fit for reparenting the inner child and connecting with the Shannon techniques you can use for that. So I will put links to all of those other teachings in the show notes if they are of interest to you. If you'd like to work one-to-one with David on any of the issues we talked about today, David works by Zoom video call with clients all over the world every week. And again, I will put some more information on David's sessions in the show notes for you. And finally, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel because we produce new teachings every week and we love to share your journey with you. Bye-bye.